come up with one that is more ecologically friendly, but it's combustible. Yeah, minor detail. Having gone from the Freon 12 to the Freon 400s, now we're going to something else entirely. Every time they do that, you got to buy a whole new system.
Why don't you get in?
Yes, you probably can, but it's functioning right now, but it's shot according to pain.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't realize, I just got told the other day that mine is the only type of a package unit on site. They've changed over all the rest of the homes.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see a great turnout for the Academy today. And we are going to have our own John Curtis, our resident professional architect, who is probably the greatest expert we could have on the subject. And I'm not going to give any further introduction because I couldn't possibly explain things as well as he'd be able to for himself. So I will turn this over to John.
Thank you, Bob. I was just telling some of my compatriots here, they asked how many times I'd been to Notre Dame, and I said I've never even been in Paris or France. Right up to my chin. Is that better? No? All right, well, I'll have to talk loud and have the microphone up here too. So anyway, I've never been to France, so I've never been in this building, but I've done a little research. Now, where's Gene? Is he here? Gene? Oh, my. Well, he said he had been there 32 times this morning, and I wondered why he wasn't giving this talk, but he said it was because I was the architect. So I have been in a lot of cathedrals, a lot of European cathedrals, and so I have an understanding of what's going on. This is Notre Dame de Paris. Construction started around 1200. King Louis IX donated what is purported to be the crown of thorns in 1239 or something like that. There are no thorns left on the crown of thorns, so it may be genuine because people have broken off all the thorns to have a little piece of antiquity. But the crown of thorns survived the fire. They were able to get it out, and it's got a new prominent place of display in the rebuilt Notre Dame. The fire is the first of several, or the first of several fires, I think, was in around 1400, while just about the time the cathedral finished construction the first time. They had a fire and had to build on it some more. There have been other fires through the centuries. So our fire of 2019 was not absolutely unique, but it was more devastating than any previous one. Notre Dame is an example of early Gothic architecture. It is not the first, but it's one of the first few large cathedrals that had flying buttresses. Saint-Denis is probably the first one. But Gothic architecture is characterized by large windows, lots of light inside, thinner walls, flying buttresses, pointed arches, things like that. Over the centuries, Notre Dame fell into disrepair and was severely vandalized during the French Revolution in the late 1700s. Napoleon, of all people, did some of the initial restoration, he got the place put back together well enough so he could crown himself emperor in Notre Dame in 1804, I think it was. So Napoleon actually started getting Notre Dame put back together. And perhaps Napoleon motivated Victor Hugo, to write his book Notre Dame de Paris, which we call The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So anyway, that would have been in the middle 1800s, and later in the 1860s, they undertook a significant renovation under the guidance of the architect Viollet-le-Duc. And that renovation generated the spire that was on Notre Dame at the time of the fire. And Leduc made some changes to some of the windows, some of the stained glass windows, and other minor changes in the place. But the biggest thing he did was the spire. So this is the fire of 2019. And you can see the spire falling down into the church. And at the very top of the spire, there's a rooster, a bronze rooster. And it was severely damaged, obviously, when it fell 300 feet or so to the floor, and so they actually have a new bronze rooster now. And one of the interesting things is that in that rooster are the names, it's something of a time capsule, are the names of some 2,000 plus construction workers who have invested these past 5 years in the renovation of the building. So when the fire was all over, there was a lot of discussion about how should Notre Dame be rebuilt. Should it be something entirely different? Should they just knock it down and start over? Should the spire be a different design? And there were all kinds of, for every architect there was a harebrained scheme to change it. But ultimately the preservationists won out. And Notre Dame has been rebuilt these past 5 years as close as possible to its original construction before the fire. There was talk about, again, all kinds of spires. There was talk about a glass spire and something that was golden. And the Philippe Villanueva, who was the architect that supervises all the historic structures in France, said that a redesigned spire would be like giving the Mona Lisa a nose job. So we have the same spire we had before. Don't worry about that. Thank you. Let's see, what do we got here? At the time of this fire, actually there was a renovation underway that cost about $180 million. And they don't really know at this point what caused the fire. The suspicion is that it might have been an electrical short. But anyway, the fire started in the roof framing of the cathedral. And ultimately it spread rather quickly up into the spire, and then along the length of the cathedral to where the entire attic framing, what they called the forest, was involved. And the fire got into the north tower at the front of the church, not into the south tower. And the firemen ultimately were able to save the tower, which was fortunate because if it had come down, it might have taken the whole building with it. So they did lose the gable end walls of both the north and the south transepts, and there was some damage done along the tops of the side walls of the cathedral when the roof fell in. Now, the roof on Notre Dame and on most of the medieval cathedrals is made out of lead. Lead is a very pliable material. It's easy to work, and it's very resistant to environmental decay. One of the cathedrals I was on, they had just put a new lead roof on, and that roof was about a ½ an inch thick. So the lead roof weighs a lot. I probably could, yeah, it probably weighs, I'd guess maybe 10, 15 pounds a square foot at a ½ an inch thick. So it's a lot of weight up there. I think it's 600 tons of lead on that roof, and that entire roof melted. Some of it, most of it flowed down into the inside of the cathedral itself. You know, both the lead and lead dust coated most of the inside of the cathedral. It took them almost 2 years to secure the structure itself. Let's see what I have on that. This would be a picture of you know, what things looked like relatively soon after the fire. You can see this is one of the vaults, and you can actually see that there's some holes here. So this is very near the transept where parts of the spire fell through and penetrated the vault itself. But from this point on back toward the front of the church, the west side of the church, you can see all this debris piled in here. The debris from the old roof fell on top of the vaults, and the vaults held. They did not collapse. So probably 90% of the stonework in the ceiling of the church survived the fire. And that's kind of amazing when you think about it. But we're looking here. This would be the area of the transept. This is north, this is south. We're looking west. So one of the things they did initially is to build a temporary roof over top the remaining structure, just to weather the structure and keep it keep it out of the weather. And you can see scaffolding everywhere. I mean, the two towers, this is the north tower, which was just barely saved from the fire, and the south tower. And in the south tower, there were just 2 bells. I think there were 8 bells in the north tower. One of the 2 bells in the south tower was one called Emmanuel. At the bottom of that bell, it's 9 feet wide. It's a huge bell. It weighs about, I think, 14,000 pounds. And they don't ring it very often, but they do ring it. I think I read somewhere it was an F sharp or something like that. I don't know. But doesn't make a real high-pitched sound. And so there were 2 bells here and 8 bells there. In the renovated cathedral, there's going to be a 9th bell in the North Tower. How many of you watched the Olympics? What did the athletes do when they won an event? There was a bell. They rang the bell. It was the victory bell. So the victory bell from the Olympics will be installed in the north tower of the renovated Notre Dame. So. Okay, this is another picture looking to the west toward the towers. And here are the flying buttresses. And I don't know whether you could make it out, but underneath each one of these flying buttresses, they've built a wooden truss to support it during construction. And let's see. For my own board. This is a cross-section sketch I did a couple of years ago, the first time I did a version of this talk. And this is a cross-section through the nave. This is the nave at Notre Dame. These are the vaulted ceilings. This is about 120 feet up to where these trusses start. And here are the flying buttresses. And they come from outside. They're very large, massive structures. And then they have an arch that goes over and braces the top of the wall. And when this roof structure falls down, the top of the wall doesn't need to be braced anymore. The flying buttresses would actually tend to push the top of the wall in. And so they built these temporary trusses underneath the bottom of the flying buttresses to relieve the load on the walls to keep the flying buttresses, which in normal circumstances hold the cathedral up, to keep them from knocking the cathedral down. So. It took, as I said earlier, about 2 years just to stabilize the structure, and a tremendous amount of work. You can see the temporary roof over most of the nave and the choir area. The nave is that part of the church that is closest to the bell towers. Then you have the crossing. These are the transept walls. That's the crossing. And then the choir is everything down here to this round structure. And so that's kind of the organization of the plan of the church. This is a view from the south side of the church, and we talked a little bit about some of the scaffolding, but, whoops, pushed the wrong button. Right here is the south transept, and they've got scaffolding all up outside of that. There's scaffolding going up here on the roof, getting ready to build the new spire. So scaffolding contractors had a field day. Both the north and the south transept walls were lost when the spire fell, and those had to be rebuilt with stone matching the original. Every stone is different. There's probably no two the same. You have to remember that they built this church, they built the south wall first, and maybe 20 years later, they built the north wall. And, you know, it's difficult to find two architects to design the same thing the same way, and so the walls don't really match each other. I think the south walls are thicker than the north walls. The walls aren't quite parallel. They aren't quite in a straight line. So every time you built a new truss, it was different than the truss next to it. So. If y'all have questions, I can field them along the way. But again, we had about 2,000 workers that were involved in the restoration. People who were skilled in medieval construction practices, carpenters, stonemasons. The organ itself did not burn, but it had to be completely taken apart because it was contaminated with lead, and so they had to ship the organ out, clean it, and bring it back and rebuild it. And I think there's 8,000 pipes in that organ, so you didn't retune that quickly. So it took more than a little while to retune it. If you can imagine a complex construction job, when you have 2,000 workers, one is dependent on another finishing his work before he can start. And there's a lot of interplay that goes on depending on what part of the cathedral you're in, which contractor or subcontractor you're working for. There actually was... Let's see if I can get myself turned around. I have a little less than no balance. So there was one contractor who built all the new trusses over the nave. There was another contractor that built all the wood framing for the spire, and a third contractor built all the wood framing over the choir area. So you had 3 timber contractors and probably multiple contractors in every other stage. The timber contractors were dependent on the scaffolding contractors, and so the coordination that had to take place was just immense. And the Archbishop of Paris called this a spiritual effort. And I think he summed that up nicely. But all these people are proud to say that I helped rebuild Notre Dame. Okay, this is another picture. You can see, again, the scaffolding on the south transept. Here's scaffolding around the south wall of the choir area, the temporary roof over the choir, the scaffolding that's going up to support the new spire. These are the trusses underneath the flying buttresses. Just a tremendous amount of work just to stabilize the structure and to be able to go forward with the interior renovations. Now, let's see here. Another picture showing all the scaffolding that's in place. The south wall of the transept, well, where are you? Looks like my laser pointer decided it doesn't want to point anymore. Where is it? Okay, well, the south wall of the transept, you can see where the rose window there is in the center of the picture. That's been completed. There's scaffolding up here toward the bell towers at the west end of the church. Extensive scaffolding all over the choir area. We've got cranes that have just lifted the new spire into place, and the new rooster would be right up there at the top of that spire. The spire is all framed in wood and covered in lead. the inside. Again, this is all scaffolding that was put together to be able to frame that new roof. I'm walking over here for some reason. I wonder what it is. Okay. This is a plan of Notre Dame. Here are the bell towers on the west facade. The east facade is where the chapels and the ambulatory are, and the choir area. This is the transept. The center of the transept is called the crossing. The spire is immediately above that. And then this would be the nave where people sit. There'll be about 1,500 new chairs in the new Notre Dame. The altar sits here in the just right here at the crossing. And when the spire fell down, it actually broke through the floor, and then they had to remove more of the floor to support the scaffolding you see in this picture, to hold up the construction of the new spire. And when they did that, they discovered not one but two sarcophaguses that they didn't know were underneath the crossing area. I think one of them they think might have been a saint, and the other one I think they said might be a poet, but those apparently were put there in the 15 and 1600s. So they learned things as they went along. As I mentioned earlier, the church inside is about 120 feet high. Still no pointer. I think it's about 180 feet to the crown of the roof. So there was a lot of effort to get all that scaffolding in there to hold things up for these workers. They have an elevator that's built into the scaffolding to kind of hustle people up and down, a couple of large cranes to be able to set the trusses. Just so you can get an idea, this would be at the area of the crossing where the roof fell in. You can see that they've actually had to excavate some of the floor behind these people. But this whole scaffolding system is supporting the new construction until everything is in place. One of the most fascinating things to me, because I come from a family of carpenters, was the construction of the new roof trusses. These are all essentially, one of those beams is a tree. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's probably 5 big trees and pieces of some others in each truss. Over something around 2,500 oak trees were individually selected from forests around France and Belgium. Each tree was selected with the thought that it was going to go in a specific truss. And the way they made these trusses originally was they literally hand-hewed rectangular beams out of the trees. For the reconstruction, they took an expedient step, and they sawed the sides of these timbers, but they hewed the top and the bottom. And unlike what we would do today, they used green timber to frame this building. We would not do that today, but what they've discovered is that the green timber and the way they hew the wood tends to keep the extreme fibers of the wood that make up, more toward the outer layer of the tree, tends to keep them intact and allow them to run continuously along these beams. Now, if we were cutting these beams, we would cut all that stuff away and try to get to the heartwood that we would think was going to be stronger. But actually, the way the green timber works and the way it ages, there's kind of a flexible strength that accrues to this building by using green timber to frame it. So, the trick is that you have to kind of follow the system that was used originally, because the green timber ultimately will shrink, and it'll shrink more than dried timber would shrink. So you have to allow for these things to happen as you design these trusses. Now, before 1912, or 2012, excuse me, they could not have replicated these trusses. There was no documentation available for what these trusses looked like, for what their dimensions were. The entire interior of the cathedral was well documented, but the attic framing itself was not. They actually had drawings from Viollet-le-Duc of what the new spire needed to be. They had his original drawings of the timber framing for the spire. So they had good guidance for the spire, but not for the trusses. And from about 2012 to 2014, two architectural students took on the task of documenting the forest, of documenting each one of these trusses and measuring them, figuring out what their spacing was, and taking pictures. And they didn't have perfect documentation, but they had enough to where they knew what these trusses needed to be when they rebuilt the cathedral. So until those two young men did their work, there wasn't anything to guide the fabrication of these new trusses. Now, the trusses were built off-site, and there's an organization that predates the rebuilding of Notre Dame called, perhaps not uniquely, but Carpenters Without Borders. This organization specializes in rebuilding historic structures. And there was a small timber construction firm in northern France that was involved with Carpenters Without Borders and had experience in rebuilding these timber structures. And then there was a larger firm, I think in southern France, that also had experience doing timber structures, but they weren't familiar with the medieval construction techniques. And so these two firms joined together in a partnership to rebuild the trusses over Notre Dame. And one firm rebuilt the trusses over the nave, and the other firm rebuilt the trusses over the choir. And the firm that had the experience in medieval construction kind of guided the way, and they actually went out and recruited 55 or 60 carpenters from around the world that were familiar with medieval construction techniques. And then they had to get tools for these carpenters. So they built, they had to make 60 kind of chopping axes, and then 60 more broad axes that they actually used to chip and hew these beams to shape. So each one of these guys got 2 new axes, and the axes were specially built for each individual person. If they were left-handed, they got a left-handed axe. If they were right-handed, they got a right-handed axe. The handle was shaped the way that person needed it to be shaped, based on his hands and his height and things like that. So they were custom-built axes. And the axes that they used in medieval times and that these replicated were actually built out of 2 different kinds of steel. One was a very hard steel on the cutting edge, and then forged in with that was a softer steel so that the person wielding that axe didn't get beat up quite so bad by the force of the blows he was making against the wood. So obviously there was a specialty foundry that put together these axes for the reconstruction of Notre Dame. The reconstruction of the forest was completed just in January of this year. So it's been there 11 months. And you can't do any work inside until you have a roof on the place. So they've done a lot of work in the last 11 months, just getting to where they are. This is a picture of the roof framing as it's being installed. We're looking primarily at the nave area. This would be, toward the front of the church, above where the people sit. You can see how the trusses, as you work along the length of the nave, as you get down closer to the transept, notice that the trusses are about twice as close together. It's because of the increased loads from the weight of the spire itself. So you need more to support the weight of the spire as you get down toward the crossing. Over top these trusses, they put timber boards. We might call that sheathing. And then you had a layer of waterproofing fabric that went on top of the sheathing, and then the lead roofing panels went on top of that. So this, you can see that it's a pretty complex arrangement, and that's just the framing of the nave area. Let's see, this is a guy, what's his name? You'd probably like to know his name, wouldn't you? You're just chomping at the bit. I think his name is Ned Silver. He's an American. And there were several Americans among these 60 medieval carpenters that they recruited, to do this work. And, not all the timbers came down at the fire, so he's actually working with some of them. This would be up toward the bell towers that might have survived. And you can see the pegs sticking through the truss. These are all what they call mortise and tenon joints. They built these trusses in a shop. They put them together with steel pegs. Then they took them apart, shipped the pieces to the site, and reassembled them with wooden pegs so that it would match the original construction. Let's see what comes up next. Okay, well, I've got something out of order here. Let's see. How far behind am I? Okay, this is the framing, again, of the roof trusses as they come together supporting the spire. And the spire is in place and it's largely finished. Most of what you see in the lower part of the spire is wood, and then the top of the spire is all lead, all the ornament and everything else, and then at the very top of it is the rooster. The new rooster, unlike the old one, has his wings raised, like the phoenix, a symbol of victory. And so it's not quite a copy, but that was a meaningful addition that was designed into the new building. Another shot of the spire itself, and you can see the rooster up at the very top of the spire, atop the cross. There are purported to be 1,230 oak beams, hand-carved oak beams, in the spire itself. So it's a very complex structure. Another thing that they did when they were out searching for trees is the area at the east end of the church where they have the rounded apse, and even around the base of the spire itself, they didn't need straight beams. They needed curved beams. So they went out and found oak trees that had just the right bend in them to form the curved beams from. Again, that let them keep the exterior fibers of the beam intact, preserve the strength of those curved beams, and the integrity of the entire structure. So you don't find irregular shaped oak trees at the drop of a hat. So there was quite a treasure hunt that went on trying to find trees that they could adapt for these curved and irregular shaped beams. Let's look at the plan a minute. One of the problems that they had when the fire first broke out was that when the fire control officer sent people up into the attic to locate the fire, they went to the wrong place. And they came back and said there's no fire. But yet there was smoke accumulating in the nave. So somebody said, well, there is a fire. And so they had to go back. And they had gone to the wrong part of the attic. And they finally found the fire and called the fire department. And I think all that took something like 30 or 45 minutes. To let a fire like this get going good for 30 or 45 minutes meant you didn't put it out very readily. So there was no detection system in the attic, and there was no fire protection system in the attic. So once that got burning, it could race through the entire wooden structure of the attic, and that's why most of these timbers fell. They didn't necessarily all burn up, but they became debris laying on top of the vaulted of the arches, the vaults. So if we've all tried to start a fire with big logs, and it's hard to keep it going sometimes. But all you have to do is have one part of that truss fail, and the whole truss will fall. So what they've done when they rebuilt Notre Dame is they put in a set of special trusses here and here, and actually spread apart some distance, so that you now have, and they covered these trusses with fireproof drywall, and they became a draft stop in the attic. This is something that we'd be required to do in modern day construction, so that if a fire got started, if it got started here, it couldn't burn through to here, and it couldn't burn through to there, because you had these fire barriers separating the trusses. And within those fire barriers, they actually built right in this area, right here, and down here, they have 3 large tanks of pressurized water that they feed with standpipes, so that if there were another fire, they have what amounts to a sprinkler system in the attic. It's a specially designed sprinkler system, not like the one in this building that shoots out a big spray, but it actually shoots out a mist into these beams and keeps the fire under control until the firemen can get there. And then they have spotted around the building fire hydrants at strategic locations around the building. They've actually built a fire access road around Notre Dame, to where if they ever had another fire, they can bring fire trucks in here, they can get them all the way around the building and out to the west portico, and they can also have another fire access road that comes up here to the crossing, so they can get their fire apparatus completely around the building if they ever had another fire. So they've taken extreme measures to be able to protect all this timber framing that they've just rebuilt. This is a picture inside the nave area, looking toward the choir area. And let's see. No, that's blood work. That won't do any good. The pictures I'm giving you are some that Gene sent me late last week after I'd put this presentation to bed. But one of the things they did on the inside of the church, you had lead contamination, lead dust on all of the stonework. And the first thing they did was they went in and they vacuumed as much of the lead dust as they could off the stones. But there was still a lot of lead dust to be gotten off the stones. And so they came up with a latex concoction that they sprayed on the stonework. And ultimately, it peeled off. They peeled it off and peeled off the lead with the latex, and also peeled off a lot of the dirt. So what you're looking at in those pictures, the small picture is the nave before the fire, and the larger picture is the nave after the fire. And it's night and day. The small picture, the last time the inside of the church was probably cleaned, might have been a couple hundred years ago. The interior of Notre Dame, to people who were familiar with the church before the fire, when they go in, is going to be a much lighter and brighter place for quite a few years, probably for a lot of years, because they won't have to light it with candles. The new lighting system has, I think, 1,500 LED spotlights that will light the interior of the church. And these are all multicolor spotlights. I don't know whether you're familiar with LED technology, but you essentially have 4 lamps in an LED bulb, you know, 1 white and 3, I guess, red, blue, yellow, I don't know, 3 primary colors, and you can mix those 4 lights together to get any color you want. And so they'll be able to change the interior appearance of Notre Dame for the seasons. You know, I mean, they can go with ecumenical colors as the seasons go by. And this is something, quite frankly, that we do in just about every church that we would design today, is we'll use multicolor LED lighting so that you can just create all kinds of dramatic effects with the lighting. I don't know, one of my favorite cathedrals is La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Have any of you ever been there? Okay, several of you have. I've been there multiple times. Never been to Notre Dame, but I am a Gaudí fan. But Gaudí did this same thing at La Sagrada Familia with early 20th century techniques. La Sagrada Familia is not oriented with the choir to the east like Notre Dame is. It's oriented with the choir to the north. So the east and west walls, the long walls of the nave, are on the, you know, his original wall was the east wall of the church. And these are the walls that have all the big windows in them. And he put different color glass in the east wall than he has in the west wall. So the nave at La Sagrada Familia changes colors as the day goes on. And so he's accomplished the same thing with the sunlight that we now do at Notre Dame with LEDs. But these last 2 pictures are not of the restored church. This is a picture of the nave, similar to the one that you're holding, the smaller picture, in its original condition. But it gives you a sense of, you know, what the interior of the church will look like when the furnishings and things are put in place. The furnishings, the building is owned by the French government. The furnishings are owned by the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is putting in all the new furnishings, and they've decided that you know, they're going to update the interior furnishings. So they've hired their own designers to come up with 1,500 new chair designs, new chairs for the altar area, a new baptistry, new altar, and these kind of things. So the fixtures that will be inside Notre Dame will not replicate what was there originally, but they will be much more contemporary than what we have. And again, the chairs are going to be 1,500 oak chairs. They have curved backs on them, and it's really going to be a sight to see, I think, when all is complete. If you can imagine, when you come into the church, we're headed to the east. So we've just come in the center portal of the west wall of the church. And one of the things they've done in the new church is they've also redone all the chapels around the perimeter of the church. So this is a view looking down the length of the nave and the choir. And when you come in the front door, you'll actually turn and you'll go this way. And these are all the chapels along the side of the church, around the east end and back down the south side. So you'll come in and you'll turn this way and you'll walk down this ambulatory past the chapels on the north side of the church. And so these chapels here will all have Old Testament themes. And as you go past the transept, you will get into an area where the chapels around the transept and around the choir all would reflect the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then the chapels on the south side will represent some of the most revered saints of the Catholic Church. So all those chapels have been refurbished. The artwork has been cleaned and updated. The vaults themselves, have all been cleaned, and there's actually accent colors on the vaults that outline them and make them more dramatic. You can see the ribbed vaults up there. There's all different colors that will be incorporated into that. And so the interior, in addition to being lighter, is going to have a more carefully constructed theme. And then again, this is the exterior of the church after the fire, but it's essentially what we have right now. They haven't done anything to the primary walls of the church. We do have a new roof covering on this. And one of the interesting things about the roof covering, and it's hard to see at this detail, but right along the ridge of the roof, there's a whole bunch of what they call medallions. And these are kind of an open framework of I think it's lead, but I think each one weighs about 900 pounds, and they had to lift them in place with a crane. They're about 1 meter wide, and they line the entire ridge of the roof. And architecturally, what that does is it captures your eye as it gets up to the ridge of the roof. It has a line of detail that captures your eye. While they have essentially completed the interior renovation, the first service will be held on December the 7th, the evening of December the 7th, to rededicate the cathedral. And then on December the 8th, the public will be allowed to enter the cathedral. There's been quite a debate over whether or not to charge for admission to the renovated Notre Dame. And the church is very much opposed to that. But the government would kind of like to charge because they need the revenue. There are, I think, 5,000 historic churches in France in need of repair. 500 of those have already been closed because they're unsafe for occupancy. And so there's a desperate need for a revenue stream to do this historic preservation work. And there's quite a debate going on about whether or not it's even legal in France to charge for admission to the church. There's a law in France that says you can't charge a tax on a church. And so would charging for a ticket be a tax? So, that's for somebody else to decide, not me. But in any event, if you do want to go visit Notre Dame, you're going to have to get an advanced admission ticket, even if it doesn't cost you anything. So you're going to have to reserve the right to get into the church. And the thought is you may be able to get a ticket just a few days in advance. You may not have to get it a few months in advance. But they're going to limit the number of visitors in the church at any one time to 2,500 people. So that's really quite a few. But and there'll also be ongoing services while 2,500 people are wandering around in the church. And so that's going to be interesting to see how well that works. But so we're 5 years into the renovation process, and we have the interior done. And at the moment, the estimated completion for the exterior work that has to happen is 2028, so 4 more years. And what has to happen on the outside is that all the stonework has to be cleaned, it has to be repointed, there's probably repairs to be done to the stonework and the towers and along the walls of the nave, the flying buttresses. The court around the church is going to be completely rebuilt. The plaza area at the east end, where it goes out to the Seine, will be re-landscaped into I think a large lawn area. Again, it's also the fire access road, that's a lawn that the fire trucks can drive on. They're going to replant all the trees that you see around the perimeter of the church. And then the east plaza at the front of the church will be redone as well. Under that east plaza, it actually is a parking garage, and they're going to turn the parking garage into a visitor center. So I'm not sure where you'll get to park, but anyway, that will be part of the challenge. And you'll actually be able to enter into the cathedral from the below ground visitor center. So anyway, well, that's interesting. Oh, we're back to the beginning. Okay, that pretty well concludes what I have to say. 2 minutes to 4, so I think that's when we're supposed to be done. Larry. Well, the rooster, I remember reading about that. There's a special fondness for the rooster in France. And there was an original rooster there, and so they're replacing it. Yes? Was the furnishing in place? Yeah, they've only got a few days left. Yeah, one of the interesting pictures I came across was of these kind of high-scale rope workers who were helping to take down the scaffolding, and here these guys were rappelling down ropes at the east end of the choir. Yes. On what day? Okay, all right. PBS, the 12th of December, a special on the rebuilding of Notre Dame. You can check up on me. They're going to completely rebuild it. I would think they will level it out. There's actually talk that they're somehow going to build a stream through that West End Plaza, with the thought that the running water in the stream will keep it cooler out in that particular plaza area. Yeah. Most of the stained glass windows survived intact. They've had to go in and restore them, and they've discovered that Ledoux in the 1800s made some significant changes to the stained glass windows that they might have forgotten about. But by and large, although they had damage to the gable walls above the rose windows in the north and south transepts, the windows themselves survived intact. Susan. I'm sure everybody rethought what they have, and you know, I'm sure there's a lot of work going. One of the interesting things is that, you know, the cost of this renovation is somewhere $700–800 million plus the work yet to be done on the exterior. It's easy to imagine they're going to spend $1 billion altogether. They've raised over $900 million. Two of the luxury good retailers in France, I got their names written down here somewhere, but between the two of them, they put up $339 million to get the fundraising started. For them, that was probably a month's allowance or a week's allowance. But anyway, so, you know, from very large corporations, very wealthy people, the funding of this renovation is actually somewhat medieval, where you had patrons supporting the arts, and that's what's happened by and large. Now, they have a total of 340,000 contributions that have been made. So that would be that 340,000 at $100 each would be $340 million, but anyway, or $34 million. So, you know, those gifts are pretty large. So anyway, it's amazing the number of people that have made significant gifts to the rebuilding of Notre Dame. And we are supposed to be done. If Gene were here, he would have taken the microphone away from me, so I will surrender it.
Thank you very much, John. We really appreciate it, and this is very, very interesting.